The morning sky over Valara Prime burned with colors that no human had ever seen. 3 suns hung in the pale green atmosphere, casting soft light across the crystal towers of the capital city. The Valarians moved through their daily routines with grace, their long limbs carrying them effortlessly in the low gravity. They were a peaceful species, evolved on a gentle world where danger was almost unknown. Ambassador Kelris stood in his office high above the city, looking out at the peaceful scene below. He had spent his entire life in diplomatic service, traveling to other worlds and meeting other species. The galaxy was full of different civilizations, and most of them lived in harmony. Wars were rare, usually settled through negotiation and compromise. That was the civilized way. The alarm changed everything. It started as a low tone, then grew into a screaming wail that echoed through every building in the city. Kelris felt his blood turn cold. He had never heard this alarm before, but every Valarian knew what it meant. Invasion. He rushed to the window and looked up. The sky was darkening, but not from clouds. Ships were appearing, hundreds of them, dropping out of faster-than-light travel. They were organic things, grown rather than built, covered in thick armor that looked like insect shells. The Krell had arrived. Kelris had heard stories about the Krell swarm. Every diplomat in the galaxy knew about them. They were conquerors, moving from system to system, taking what they wanted and enslaving everyone they found. But the Krell had never come this far into civilized space before. The Valarians had no enemies. They had no reason to expect an attack. The first bombs fell within minutes. Kelris watched in horror as the beautiful crystal towers exploded into fragments. The energy shields that protected the city flickered and died under the brutal kinetic weapons. The Krell did not use elegant technology. They used simple, overwhelming force. The Valarian defense fleet launched from orbital stations. 50 ships, sleek and advanced, rose to meet the invaders. Kelris allowed himself a moment of hope. His people had good technology. Perhaps they could drive the Krell away. That hope died quickly. The Krell swarmed the Valarian ships like insects attacking prey. For every Krell ship destroyed, 5 more took its place. The Valarian weapons were designed for precision and efficiency. The Krell simply had more ships than the Valarians had ammunition. Within an hour, the defense fleet was gone. Kelris fled the capital as Krell dropships landed in the streets. He saw his people trying to fight back with whatever they could find, but the Valarians were not warriors. They had never needed to be. The Krell soldiers tore through them easily, capturing thousands and killing anyone who resisted. He made it to an underground bunker in the ruins of the government district. A few dozen other survivors were there, including some military officers and technical staff. They gathered around a communications console, trying to contact anyone who might help. The Galactic Council was their first call. Surely the other civilized species would help, but the answer came back quickly and coldly. The Council could not intervene in what they called an internal matter. They would file a formal protest with the Krell and schedule a hearing in 6 months. Kelris wanted to scream. In 6 months, his entire species would be extinct. They tried calling nearby systems, begging for military assistance. Some expressed sympathy. Others offered to accept refugees if any Valarians could escape. But none would send ships to fight. The Krell were too dangerous, too numerous. It was safer to let one world fall than risk starting a larger conflict. 3 days passed. The Krell controlled most of the planet. Millions of Valarians were dead or captured. Kelris watched the broadcasts from the surface and felt his hope dying. His people were sophisticated and intelligent, but they had no defense against this kind of brutality. Then one of the technical staff, a young female named Sira, suggested something unusual. She had been monitoring all communication frequencies, including those considered too primitive to be useful. She had picked up signals from a distant system, a world called Earth. Kelris had heard of Earth. It was classified as a death world, a planet where the environment was so hostile that survival required constant adaptation. The species there, humans, were considered primitive by galactic standards. They had only achieved faster-than-light travel 20 years ago. Most civilized species avoided them, but Sira pointed out something interesting. Earth had something that no other species seemed to have: a military. A real military designed for large-scale warfare. Most galactic species had small defense forces meant to deter pirates or handle minor disputes. Humans had armies and fleets built specifically for fighting wars. Kelris made the decision. They would send a message to Earth. What did they have to lose? He recorded the message himself, speaking in the human language that Sira had learned from their broadcasts. His voice shook as he described what was happening. The cities burning, the people dying, the Krell slaughtering everything in their path. He showed footage of the destruction, of Valerian children being dragged away by Krell soldiers. He begged for help, for anything the humans could provide. The message was sent on all frequencies, pushed out with as much power as they could generate. Then they waited. On Earth, in a facility buried beneath the Swiss Alps, Commander Jake Harrigan was finishing his morning coffee when the alert came through. He was a tall man with gray hair and hard eyes, a veteran of conflicts that most people preferred to forget. He commanded the United Nations Space Command, the organization responsible for Earth's presence in space. Captain Lisa Monroe rushed into his office without knocking. She was his intelligence officer, a brilliant woman who spoke 17 languages and could read ancient Earth texts as easily as modern reports. Right now, she looked pale. She showed him the message from Valara Prime. They watched it together in silence. The footage was bad, worse than anything Harrigan had seen since the climate wars. These Valerians were being systematically destroyed, and they were helpless to stop it. Monroe pulled up data on the Krell. The information was limited, but what they had was disturbing. The Krell had conquered 17 systems in the past century. They took everything of value and left ruins behind. They were good at what they did, and what they did was destroy civilizations. Harrigan called an emergency meeting of the Security Council. Representatives from every nation on Earth gathered in the chamber, their faces appearing on screens from capitals around the world. He showed them the message. The debate was intense. Some argued that Earth had no business interfering in alien conflicts. Others said that the Valerians were 40 light-years away, too far to reach in time to matter. A few pointed out that helping might make the Krell see Earth as an enemy, but Harrigan had fought in enough wars to know what was right. He stood before the council and spoke plainly. Humanity had faced extinction multiple times. They knew what it meant to fight for survival against impossible odds. If they had the power to help and chose not to, what did that say about them? He talked about the values that humanity claimed to hold. Justice, protection of the innocent, standing against tyranny. Those were just words unless humans acted on them. The Valerians were dying while asking for help. Earth could provide that help. The vote took 12 hours. In the end, it passed by a narrow margin. Earth would respond to the Valerian plea. They would send their fleet. Admiral Kevin Rourke received his orders at the Luna shipyards. He was a lean man with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. He had commanded fleets during the Mars Rebellion and the Titan blockade. He knew space combat better than anyone alive. His orders were clear. Take the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet to Valara Prime. Assess the situation. Provide humanitarian aid. If necessary, eliminate the Krell threat. It was the last part that made Rourke smile grimly. Earth was going to war and he would lead them. The fleet began preparing immediately. Ships that had been in dock for maintenance were rushed back into service. Marines who were on leave were called back to duty. Supplies were loaded, weapons were checked, and battle plans were drawn up. Monroe sent a message back to Valara Prime. It was short and simple. Help was coming. Hold on. In his bunker beneath the ruins, Kelris received the message and wept. He had not expected an answer. Certainly not from a species that most of the galaxy dismissed as primitive. But the humans had responded. They were coming. He shared the news with the other survivors. Some were hopeful. Others were skeptical. What could one species do against the Krell swarm? The humans were newcomers to space, barely more advanced than the Valerians themselves. How could they possibly make a difference? But Kelris remembered something he had read in the human broadcasts that Sira had intercepted. Humans had a saying about their world. Earth was not a kind place. It was a planet that tried to kill everything that lived on it. The species that survived there became hard, adaptable, and very good at fighting. The Krell thought they were the deadliest thing in the galaxy. They had never met a species from a death world. They had never met humans. Kelris looked at the countdown on his display. 3 weeks until the human fleet arrived. He just had to keep his people alive until then. In the ruins above, Krell soldiers patrolled the streets. In orbit, their bioships surrounded the planet. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. The Luna shipyards floated in orbit above Earth's moon. a massive complex of docks and construction facilities that had taken decades to build. Ships of all sizes filled the yards, from small patrol craft to massive battle carriers. Today, 27 of them were preparing for war. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Walsh walked along the dock, watching the loading crews work with practiced efficiency. Every soldier carried weapons and ammunition, medical supplies, food, water, and enough equipment to survive in hostile environments. His Marines were the best Earth had to offer, and he was making sure they had everything they needed. Walsh was a broad-shouldered man with a scarred face and steady hands. He had grown up in the Australian outback, one of the harshest places on Earth, and joined the Marines as soon as he was old enough. He had fought on Mars during the rebellion, when colonists tried to break away from Earth's government. He knew what real combat looked like. The flagship of the fleet was the UNS Retribution, and it was a monster. Nearly 2 kilometers long, covered in armor plating that could withstand nuclear weapons and armed with enough firepower to level a city. Its main guns were rail guns that could accelerate metal slugs to 3% of light speed. Its missile batteries carried warheads ranging from conventional explosives to nuclear bombs. It was designed for one purpose: winning wars. Walsh entered the briefing room where the senior staff was gathering. Admiral Rourke stood at the front, studying a holographic display of the Valara system. Captain Monroe was there too, along with Major Nicole Carter, who commanded the Marine Division. Carter was shorter than Walsh, but twice as fierce. She had served in every major conflict of the past 15 years and had earned her reputation the hard way. Her Marines would follow her anywhere, and she knew exactly how to use them in battle. Monroe started the briefing by displaying everything they knew about the Krell. The images showed insectoid creatures, each about the size of a human but built very differently. They had 4 arms, thick armor plating, and mandibles that could crush steel. They moved in swarms coordinated by some kind of hive mind. The Krell had conquered 17 systems in the past century. Their method was always the same. They arrived in overwhelming numbers, destroyed any resistance, and took everything they wanted. They enslaved populations for labor and stripped planets of resources. Then they moved on to the next target. But Monroe had found weaknesses. The Krell relied on their numbers and intimidation. They had never faced a species that could match their brutality. Their technology was advanced in some ways, particularly in biological engineering, but their weapons were relatively simple. They preferred mass-produced bioweapons over sophisticated targeting systems. More importantly, the Krell had never fought a Deathworld species. Every species they had conquered came from safe, peaceful worlds. The Valarians evolved on a planet with low gravity and no dangerous predators. Other Krell victims came from similar backgrounds. None of them had any real experience with violence. Humans were different. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, one of the most dangerous planets in known space. The gravity was higher than most habitable worlds. The atmosphere had violent storms. Earthquakes and volcanoes reshaped the landscape constantly. The oceans were full of creatures that could kill with a single bite. Even the microorganisms were deadly if not properly managed. Humans evolved to survive all of that. They were stronger, faster, and more durable than most species. Their reflexes were lightning quick. Their endurance was extraordinary, and they had spent their entire history fighting, not just other humans but nature itself. Admiral Rourke listened to Monroe's analysis and nodded. The Krell thought they were the apex predators of the galaxy. They were about to learn differently. Carter presented her combat plan. The Marines would deploy in 3 waves if ground combat became necessary. The first wave would establish beachheads and secure landing zones. The second wave would push into Krell territory and engage their main forces. The third wave would handle rescue operations and secure any Valarian survivors. Every Marine was equipped with powered armor that enhanced their already considerable strength. Their weapons were designed to function in any environment, from the vacuum of space to underwater combat. They carried enough ammunition to fight for days without resupply. Gunnery Sergeant Chris Parker entered the room to give a report on training readiness. Parker was a living legend among the Marines. He had survived battles that killed 90% of his unit. He was hard, brutal, and completely dedicated to keeping his soldiers alive through superior training. Parker reported that the Marines were ready. They had been drilling combat scenarios non-stop, using Monroe's intelligence to simulate Krell tactics. The Marines knew what to expect and how to respond. They were eager to go. The fleet departed from Luna 3 days later. 27 ships entered hyperspace in perfect formation, beginning the 3-week journey to Valara Prime. During transit, there was no rest. Every day brought more training, more preparation. Monroe established communication with Ambassador Kelris. The connection was difficult, routed through relay stations and encoded to avoid Krell detection. When Kelris appeared on the screen, he looked tired and scared. Behind him, Monroe could see the ruins of what had once been a beautiful building. Kelris provided tactical information about Krell positions. They controlled most of the planet now, with 3 major hive complexes established in former Valarian cities. Millions of Valarians were imprisoned in these complexes, forced to work for the Krell. Thousands more were dying every day from exhaustion, disease, or simple execution when they could no longer work. The Valarian resistance was small, fewer than 5,000 fighters, and they were running out of weapons and supplies. They had managed to conduct some guerrilla operations, sabotaging Krell facilities and rescuing prisoners, but they could not mount any serious offensive. They were simply trying to survive until help arrived. Monroe assured Kelris that help was coming. The human fleet would arrive in 2 weeks. She asked him to provide detailed scans of the Krell positions and any information about their defenses. Kelris agreed, though she could see doubt in his eyes. After the call ended, Rourke asked Monroe what she thought. She was honest. The Valarians were beaten. They had given up hope. They expected the humans to arrive, try to help, and get destroyed just like everyone else who had opposed the Krell. They did not understand what humans were capable of. They had never seen real warfare, the kind where entire civilizations fought for their survival. They had never seen what happened when a Death World species decided to go to war. Rourke called a meeting of all ship captains. The briefing took place in virtual space, with holographic representations of each captain appearing around a central display. He showed them everything Monroe had learned about the Krell, and everything Kelris had provided about their positions. Then he laid out the battle plan. It was aggressive, brutal, and designed to exploit every weakness the Krell had. The fleet would not approach cautiously. They would drop out of hyperspace at maximum velocity and engage immediately. The goal was to achieve complete orbital superiority within the first hour. Commander Brandon Clark, captain of the destroyer UNS Defiance, asked about the Krell numbers. Intelligence suggested they had over 200 ships in the system. The human fleet only had 27. Rourke smiled coldly. Numbers were not everything. A single human warship was worth 10 Krell bioships. The Krell had never faced weapons like Earth's railguns and nuclear missiles. They had never fought an enemy that understood tactics and strategy as well as humans did, and they had certainly never fought a species that was willing to die to protect others. The captains understood. They had their orders. When the fleet arrived at Valara Prime, they would hit the Krell with everything they had. There would be no warnings, no negotiations, no mercy. The Krell had made their choice when they attacked a peaceful species. Now they would face the consequences. Walsh spent the journey preparing his Marines for ground combat. He knew the Krell would not surrender easily. Even after losing orbital control, they would fight for every meter of ground. The battle would be long and bloody, but Walsh had confidence in his troops. They were Deathworlders, evolved from predators, trained from childhood to overcome obstacles. The Krell might have numbers, but humans had something more important. They had the will to fight, the skill to win, and the determination to never give up. On the last day before arrival, Monroe sent another message to Kelris. She told him to prepare his people. The humans were almost there. She asked him to mark safe zones where Valarian civilians could shelter during the battle. The fighting was going to be intense. Kelris asked her a question that had been bothering him. Why were humans doing this? They had no connection to the Valarians. They were risking their lives and their ships for people they had never met. What did they hope to gain? Monroe thought about her answer carefully. She could have talked about strategic interests or political considerations, but that was not the real reason. The truth was simpler and more profound. Humans helped because it was right, because they knew what it meant to face extinction and fight for survival, because they believed that the Valara system was quiet when the human fleet arrived. The 3 suns of Valara Prime cast their light across space, illuminating the dozens of Krell bioships that orbited the planet like predators circling wounded prey. The Krell had grown comfortable here. They owned this system now, and no one was coming to challenge them. Then space itself seemed to tear open. 27 points of light appeared at the edge of the system, growing brighter as ships dropped out of hyperspace. The third expeditionary fleet had arrived, and they were moving fast. On the bridge of the UNS Retribution, Admiral Rourke watched the tactical display light up with enemy contacts. Over 200 Krell ships, just as intelligence had predicted. They ranged in size from small corvettes to massive bioconstructs that were larger than any human vessel. Rourke did not hesitate. He opened a communication channel on all frequencies and broadcast a message in the Krell language. His words were simple and direct. Leave this system immediately or be destroyed. Every Krell ship within range would hear it. They would understand what it meant. The Krell response came quickly. Instead of retreating, they launched everything they had at the human fleet. Thousands of fighter analogs poured from the bioships, swarming toward the human vessels like angry insects. Behind them, the larger Krell ships began moving into attack formation. Commander Brandon Clark stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance and smiled. His destroyer was designed specifically for this kind of engagement. He gave the order to his weapons officer, and the ship's point defense network came alive. The Krell fighters were fast and numerous, but they were fragile. Clark's guns tore through them like paper. The point defense system tracked hundreds of targets simultaneously, firing with computer precision. Each burst of fire destroyed multiple fighters. Within 3 minutes, the first wave was gone, but the Krell kept coming. More fighters launched, and the larger bioships began firing their plasma weapons. Green bolts of energy crossed the distance between fleets, each one powerful enough to vaporize a normal ship. The human ships were not normal. The Retribution took a direct hit from a Krell capital ship, and the bridge shook from the impact. But when the sensors cleared, the damage report showed only superficial burns to the ablative armor. The ship's structure was intact, all systems functioning normally. Rourke ordered the fleet to return fire. The main railgun spoke, and the sound echoed through the ship's hull. Tungsten rounds accelerated to 3% of light speed streaked across space. When they hit the Krell bioships, they punched straight through. Tearing massive holes in the organic armor, Captain Katie Morrison commanded the cruiser UNS Vengeance from her position at the tactical station. She watched the battle unfold and identified her targets carefully. The Krell ships were bunched together, a formation that worked well for overwhelming weaker opponents but was vulnerable to area weapons. Morrison ordered a missile launch. Nuclear-tipped warheads shot from her ship's batteries, dozens of them streaking toward the Krell formation. The missiles had no trouble reaching their targets. Krell point defense was designed to stop kinetic weapons, not guided missiles with electronic countermeasures. The warheads detonated in sequence, creating a chain of nuclear explosions that ripped through the Krell fleet. The intense radiation disrupted their biotechnology, causing systems to fail across multiple ships. The electromagnetic pulse knocked out communications, leaving the Krell forces blind and confused. The Krell had never encountered nuclear weapons before. Most civilized species considered them too dangerous and primitive. But humans had no such reservations. They used every tool available, and they used them well. While the fleet secured orbit, a single shuttle launched from the Retribution. Lieutenant Laura Bennett sat in the pilot seat, her hands steady on the controls. Behind her, Major Carter and a squad of Marines checked their equipment one final time. They were heading to the surface to make contact with the Valerian resistance. Bennett was the best pilot in the fleet, and she needed every bit of her skill now. The shuttle dropped into the atmosphere at high speed, and immediately Krell ground-to-air weapons locked onto them. Warning alarms filled the cockpit as missiles launched from multiple positions below. Bennett threw the shuttle into a series of violent maneuvers that would have killed anyone who was not strapped in. She dove low, using the terrain to break missile locks, then climbed rapidly to avoid ground fire. The G-forces would have knocked out most pilots, but Bennett had been born on Earth. Her body could handle it. She brought the shuttle down in the ruins of what had once been Valara Prime's capital city. Ambassador Kelrus and a group of Valerian resistance fighters were waiting at the landing zone. They stared in amazement as the human shuttle settled onto the broken pavement. The ramp dropped, and Major Carter stepped out first. She was in full combat armor, and to the Valerians she looked like something from a nightmare. The armor was twice the size of a normal person, covered in weapon mounts and sensor arrays. Carter's helmet showed no features, just a blank faceplate that reflected the ruined city. Behind Carter came the rest of the squad. Each Marine was similarly armored, carrying weapons that looked too heavy for anyone to lift. But the humans moved with the armor as if it weighed nothing, their steps confident and controlled. Kelrus approached carefully. He was tall by human standards, nearly 7 feet, but his body was thin and fragile. He had evolved on a world where the gravity was half of Earth's, where physical strength was rarely needed. Standing next to Carter in her armor, he looked like a child. Carter removed her helmet and Kelrus saw her face for the first time. She was younger than he expected, with hard eyes and scars that spoke of old battles. But when she smiled, it was genuine and warm. She told him that help had arrived. The human fleet was destroying the Krell orbital forces. Soon they would begin ground operations to liberate the planet. She asked for his tactical information about Krell positions and Valerian civilians who needed protection. Kelrus provided everything he had. Maps of the hive complexes, estimates of Krell troop strength, locations of prisoner camps. He showed her the resistance fighters, barely 5,000 people with improvised weapons. He admitted they had been fighting a losing battle, just trying to survive. One of the resistance fighters, a young Valerian named Mira, asked to see a human weapon. Carter unclipped her sidearm and handed it over. Mira tried to lift it and nearly dropped it immediately. The gun weighed 30 pounds, 3 times what a Valerian could comfortably carry. And it was just a pistol. Carter showed them the rifle instead, explaining its capabilities. It fired armor-piercing rounds that could penetrate 6 inches of steel. It had smart targeting that could track multiple enemies simultaneously. It could function in any environment, from underwater to hard vacuum, and every Marine carried 2 of them along with grenades, explosives, and backup weapons. The Valerians understood then what they were seeing. These were not just soldiers. They were warriors from a world where survival meant being stronger, faster, and more violent than anything else on the planet. Earth had created them through millions of years of brutal evolution. Above them, the battle for orbital control continued. The Krell were fighting desperately now, throwing everything they had at the human fleet. But they were losing badly. Every minute, more Krell ships fell to human weapons. The bioships that had terrorized the galaxy for decades were being torn apart. The turning point came when the Retribution engaged the Krell flagship. The massive bioconstruct was the size of a small moon, covered in weapon ports and armor plates grown from the bodies of captured species. It had destroyed entire fleets during the Krell's conquests. The Krell commanders thought it was invincible. Commander Steve Patterson sat at the engineering station and studied the flagship's structure. He was the best engineer in the fleet, and he had a gift for finding weaknesses in enemy designs. The Krell flagship was powerful, but it was also organic. It needed power distribution networks to function, biological systems that connected its various components. Patterson identified the key node, a massive nerve cluster that coordinated the ship's functions. He marked it on the tactical display and told Admiral Rourke. One shot, perfectly placed, could sever the connection and cause a cascade failure throughout the entire ship. Rourke ordered the main guns to fire. The Retribution's primary railgun charged, drawing power from the ship's reactor. When it fired, the recoil shook the entire vessel. The tungsten round crossed the distance to the Krell flagship in less than a second. The impact was catastrophic. The round punched through the flagship's armor and severed the nerve cluster exactly as Patterson had predicted. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entire bioship began convulsing as its systems failed. Explosions rippled across its surface as power conduits overloaded. Within minutes, the massive ship was breaking apart. The remaining Krell ships saw their flagship die and lost cohesion. Some tried to flee. Others continued fighting mindlessly. The human fleet hunted them down systematically, destroying every ship that did not retreat beyond the system's edge. 4 hours after the battle began, the human fleet had complete orbital superiority. Over 100 Krell ships had been destroyed. The rest had... The drop pods fell through Valara Prime's atmosphere like burning meteors. Inside each pod, a squad of Marines sat in crash seats waiting for impact. They had trained for this moment for months, running simulations and studying enemy positions. Now it was real. Sergeant Chris Parker checked his squad one last time before touchdown. He was a veteran of 15 years of combat, with scars covering half his body and a reputation for bringing his people home alive. His squad trusted him completely, and he would not let them down. The pods hit the ground hard enough to crater the pavement. Before the dust settled, the doors blew open and the Marines poured out. Parker's squad was first through, weapons up and scanning for threats. They were in the middle of a Krell-controlled district, surrounded by enemy positions. The Krell responded immediately. Warriors emerged from buildings and tunnels, their chittering war cries echoing across the ruins. They charged at the human positions with the confidence of predators that had never met anything stronger than themselves. Parker waited until they were close, then gave the order to fire. The Marines opened up with their rifles and the Krell charge faltered. The armor-piercing rounds tore through Krell warriors like they were nothing. The creatures that had terrorized the galaxy fell by the dozens, their organic armor useless against human weapons. But the Krell kept coming. For every warrior that fell, 2 more appeared. They had numbers, and they were willing to spend them. Some of them got close enough to engage the Marines directly, and that was when the real difference became clear. A Krell warrior lunged at Parker, its forearms reaching for him with claws that could cut through steel. Parker sidestepped the attack easily, his reflexes enhanced by combat drugs and years of training. He grabbed the Krell by one arm and threw it into a wall hard enough to crack the creature's exoskeleton. The Krell were strong by the standards of most species, but they evolved on low-gravity worlds just like their victims. They had never fought someone from a high-gravity planet, someone who carried bone density and muscle mass that seemed impossible. In close combat, humans were simply stronger. Major Carter coordinated the ground assault from her command post. The Marines had established 3 beachheads simultaneously, one at each of the major hive complexes. The plan was to squeeze the Krell from multiple directions, preventing them from consolidating their forces. Lieutenant Beth Crawford led her special operations team into the first hive complex. Their mission was to locate and free the Valerian prisoners before the main assault began. They moved through the organic corridors of the hive structure, using sensors to avoid Krell patrols. Crawford found the prisoner processing facility deep in the hive. Thousands of Valerians were there, crammed into cells and forced to work in conditions that would kill them within weeks. Many were already dying from exhaustion and disease. The sight made Crawford's blood boil. She placed breaching charges on the main door and blew it open. Her team stormed in, killing the Krell guards before they could respond. The prisoners looked at the humans in shock and fear, not understanding what was happening. Crawford removed her helmet so they could see her face. She told them in their own language that they were being rescued. The human military had arrived to free them. She asked them to stay calm and follow her team to safety. Dr. Greg Martinez set up a field hospital at the landing zone. He was the chief medical officer for the ground forces, and he had seen terrible things in his career. But nothing prepared him for the condition of the Valerian prisoners. They were starving, sick, and traumatized. Many would not survive even with treatment. Martinez and his team worked nonstop, treating the worst cases first and stabilizing as many as they could. The Valerians were amazed that humans had brought doctors into a combat zone. Most species kept their medical personnel far from danger, but humans believed in caring for the wounded wherever they fell. The battle for the hive complexes intensified. The Krell realized they were facing a serious threat and threw everything they had into the defense. Lieutenant Commander Walsh led Alpha Company in a direct assault on the largest hive, where intelligence suggested the Krell Queen was located. The fighting was brutal. The Krell defended every corridor and every room. Walsh's Marines pushed forward slowly, clearing the hive section by section. The close quarters favored neither side, and casualties began mounting on both sides. Sergeant Danny Griffin held a critical junction with just his squad against hundreds of Krell warriors. They had run low on ammunition and were fighting with whatever they could find. Griffin picked up a Krell weapon from a fallen enemy and used it against them, showing the same adaptability that had kept humanity alive for millennia. When reinforcements finally arrived, Griffin's squad had held the position for 3 hours. Half his people were wounded, but they had not given up a single meter of ground. That was the human way. They did not retreat. They did not surrender. They held the line no matter what it cost. Above the planet, the fleet provided support fire. When Marine units called for orbital strikes, the ships responded within seconds. Railgun rounds fell from space like the wrath of gods, destroying Krell reinforcements before they could reach the front lines. The Krell had never faced this kind of coordinated warfare before. Corporal Emma Rodriguez moved through the hive with her engineering team, placing demolition charges at structural weak points. She was small even by human standards, but she was brilliant with explosives. She knew exactly where to place charges for maximum effect. Walsh's assault reached the Queen chamber after 6 hours of continuous combat. The Krell Queen was massive, easily 4 times the size of a normal warrior. She was surrounded by hundreds of guards, the strongest and most skilled fighters the Krell had. Walsh did not try to fight through them. That would take too long and cost too many lives. Instead, he contacted Rodriguez and told her to blow the charges. She confirmed and triggered the detonation sequence. The explosions shook the entire hive structure. Support columns collapsed and whole sections of the building fell in on themselves. The Queen chamber, located in the deepest part of the hive, was buried under thousands of tons of debris. The Queen and her guards died instantly. With their Queen dead, the Krell warriors lost coordination. They continued fighting, but without the central direction that made them effective. The Marines pressed their advantage, driving the Krell back and clearing the hive complex room by room. At the other 2 hive complexes, similar battles raged. The Marines were outnumbered everywhere, but they were winning. Superior training, better equipment, and the sheer physical advantages of a Deathworld species made the difference. The Krell fought bravely, but bravery alone was not enough. Parker's squad reached a group of Valerian prisoners who had been left behind in the chaos. They were children, too young to work and scheduled for execution. Parker organized his people to protect them, forming a defensive circle while waiting for extraction. A Krell assault force found them and attacked in overwhelming numbers. Parker's squad was down to their last magazines, and he knew they could not hold much longer. But he also knew that retreat was not an option. The children would die if they left. Just when it seemed hopeless, Lieutenant Bennett brought her shuttle in at full speed. She landed in the middle of the battle, her ship taking heavy fire from Krell weapons. Parker loaded the children aboard first, then his wounded, then the rest of his squad. He was last up the ramp, firing his rifle until the moment the door closed. Bennett pulled them out of there with skill that seemed impossible. The shuttle took multiple hits but stayed in the air. She got them back to the main base where Dr. Martinez and his team were waiting. All the children survived. The battle for Valara Prime lasted 3 days. By the end, all 3 hive complexes had fallen. The Krell warriors who survived fled into the wilderness, where Valerian resistance fighters hunted them down with weapons provided by the humans. The cost had been high. 237 Marines were dead with over 500 wounded. 3 destroyers had been lost in space combat, and 6 other ships needed extensive repairs. But compared to the Krell losses, it was nothing. The Krell had lost everything. Major Carter stood in the ruins of the main hive complex and looked around at the destruction. This was war, real war, not the civilized conflicts that most galactic species practiced. It was brutal and bloody and terrible, but it was also necessary. Ambassador Kelrus found her there. He looked different now, standing straighter, speaking with more confidence. His people had survived because humans were willing to fight for them. He would never forget that. He asked Carter why humans were so good at war. She thought about the question for a long time before answering. It was not because humans loved violence. It was because they understood that sometimes peace had to be defended with force, because they came from a world where survival meant being willing to fight. Admiral Rourke arrived on the surface to survey the situation. He met with his officers and received their reports. The mission was a success. Valara Prime was free. The Krell swarm had suffered its first major defeat, but Rourke knew this was just the beginning. The Krell would recover eventually. They would attack other worlds, enslave other species, and Earth would need to decide how to respond. 3 months after the battle, Valara Prime was transforming. The ruins of the capital city were being cleared, and new buildings were rising in their place. Valerian workers operated alongside human construction crews, learning new techniques and sharing their own knowledge. The planet was healing. Captain Lisa Monroe stood on a balcony overlooking the reconstruction efforts. She had been coordinating relief operations since the battle ended, making sure food, Water and medical supplies reached everyone who needed them. The work was exhausting but satisfying. They were making a real difference. Ambassador Kelris joined her on the balcony. He looked healthier now, having gained back some of the weight he lost during the occupation. His people were recovering slowly, but they were recovering. That was what mattered. Kelris told Monroe that his government wanted to formalize the relationship with Earth. They proposed a full alliance, including technology sharing, trade agreements, and mutual defense. The Valerians had learned a hard lesson about the galaxy. Being peaceful and civilized was not enough. You also needed the strength to protect yourself. Monroe thought the proposal was good. The Valerians had advanced biotechnology that could help humanity. Their energy manipulation systems were far beyond what Earth had developed. In exchange, humans could provide military training and defensive systems. Both species would benefit. Commander Brandon Clark and his engineering team were helping the Valerians build new defenses. They designed orbital platforms with weapons that could stop another invasion. They trained Valerian technicians on how to maintain and operate the systems. The goal was to make Valara Prime able to defend itself. Clark explained to his Valerian students that defense was about more than just weapons. It was about thinking like a warrior, understanding how enemies attacked and preparing for every possibility. Most galactic species did not think this way. They relied on diplomacy and laws. Humans knew that sometimes those things were not enough. The Valerians were beginning to understand. They set up training camps where volunteers learned human combat techniques. Major Carter ran the first program personally, teaching Valerians how to use weapons, how to move under fire, and how to work as a team. The students would never match human physical capabilities, but they could learn to think like soldiers. The first class graduated after 3 months of intense training. Kelris attended the ceremony and watched as his people demonstrated their new skills. They were not the same peaceful species they had been before the Krell came. They had been changed by war, made harder and more aware of the dangers in the galaxy. Meanwhile, news of the human intervention spread across the galaxy at faster than light speed. Other civilizations that had suffered under Krell attacks sent delegations to Valara Prime. They wanted to meet these Deathworlders who had accomplished what everyone thought was impossible. Some were grateful and wanted to form alliances with Earth. Others were scared, worried about what humanity might do with its military power. A few were hostile, seeing humans as a threat to the established galactic order. The galaxy was starting to realize that a new player had arrived, and things would never be the same. The hegemony, the coalition of advanced civilizations that dominated galactic politics, sent a delegation to investigate. They arrived in ships that were elegant and sophisticated, designed to impress. When they saw the human fleet, they were shocked by how brutal and functional the warships looked. Counselor Than led the hegemony delegation. He was from the Azurai species, tall and graceful with skin that shimmered with changing colors. His people had been influential in galactic affairs for thousands of years. He expected the humans to be impressed by his authority. Admiral Rourke met with Than aboard the Retribution. He gave the counselor a tour of the ship, showing him the weapon systems and the marine barracks. Than's expression changed from confidence to concern as he realized just how powerful human military technology was. Than asked the question that everyone in the galaxy wanted to know. What did humans intend to do with their power? Would they become conquerors like the Krell? Would they try to dominate the galaxy? Rourke's answer was simple and direct. Humans had no interest in empire building. They did not want to rule other species or take their resources, but they also would not stand by and watch innocent people suffer. If aggression happened, if peaceful species were attacked, humans would respond. Than returned to the Hegemony Council with his report. The council debated for weeks about how to handle Earth. Some wanted to isolate humanity, treating them as a dangerous species that needed to be contained. Others argued for cooperation, recognizing that human military might could be useful against threats like the Krell. In the end, they agreed to open formal diplomatic relations. The hegemony would recognize Earth as an independent power, with the right to conduct its own foreign policy. In exchange, Earth would participate in galactic councils and follow certain standards of behavior. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely but prevented conflict. Lieutenant Commander Walsh was assigned as a permanent liaison to Valara Prime. He oversaw the construction of a joint military base where human and Valerian Forces could train together. The base became a symbol of the new alliance and a warning to anyone who might threaten the Valerians again. Walsh enjoyed the work. He liked the Valerians and respected their determination to become stronger. He also appreciated the irony. Before the Krell attacked, most of the galaxy saw the Valerians as weak and irrelevant. Now, because of their alliance with Earth, they were becoming important players in galactic politics. 6 months after the battle, Commander Jake Harrigan visited Valara Prime to assess the situation. He met with Kelrus and toured the reconstruction sites. He spoke with Valerian leaders and human personnel. What he found impressed him. The Valerians had not just rebuilt. They had grown stronger. Their society was changing, adapting to the harsh reality of a galaxy where violence existed. They were still peaceful and civilized, but now they understood that peace had to be defended. It was a lesson that humanity had learned thousands of years ago. Harrigan stood in the central square of the rebuilt capital and watched Valerian children playing. They ran and laughed like children everywhere, innocent and happy. But nearby, Valerian soldiers stood guard, protecting them. Those soldiers wore uniforms designed by humans and carried weapons that could stop any threat. A group of young Valerians approached Harrigan, curious about the human. They asked him questions about Earth, about the battle, about why humans had come to help them. Harrigan answered honestly, telling them that humans believed in protecting people who could not protect themselves. One child asked if humans were afraid of anything. Harrigan smiled and admitted that humans were afraid of many things, but they had learned to fight despite their fear. That was what made them strong, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. Lieutenant Bennett performed a demonstration flight for the children. Her shuttle danced through the sky, performing maneuvers that seemed impossible. The children cheered and clapped, and their parents watched with gratitude. These were the people who had saved them, who had given them a future. As Harrigan prepared to leave Valara Prime, Kelrus gave him a message to take back to Earth. It was a formal statement from the Valerian government, thanking humanity for their sacrifice and promising eternal friendship. But beyond the official words, there was genuine emotion. The Valerians would never forget what humans had done for them. Back on Earth, Admiral Rourke received new orders from the Security Council. 3 more civilizations had requested human assistance against various threats. The 3rd Expeditionary Fleet was being expanded to a full battle group with additional ships and personnel. Humanity's role in the galaxy was changing. Rourke assembled his senior staff to discuss the new missions. Captain Monroe provided intelligence briefings on each situation. Major Carter outlined the military requirements. Commander Clark calculated the logistics. They were planning for war again, but this time they knew what they were capable of. The galaxy had been dominated by civilized species who believed that conflict could always be resolved through negotiation and compromise. The Krell had proven that belief wrong. Sometimes peaceful species needed warriors to protect them. Sometimes justice required force. Humanity had accepted that role not because they wanted power or glory, but because it was right. They had seen innocent people suffering and had chosen to help, even at great cost to themselves. That was the human way. That was what made them different. The story of Valara Prime spread throughout human space. Children learned about the battle in schools. Veterans spoke with pride about the rescue mission. Politicians debated what it meant for Earth's future. But everyone agreed on one thing. Humanity had proven itself on the galactic stage. The Krell swarm retreated to their home systems, licking their wounds. They had never suffered such a catastrophic defeat. Their commanders studied the battle recordings, trying to understand how they had lost to such a small force. The answer was simple but difficult to accept. They had faced Deathworlders for the first time. Other aggressive species in the galaxy took note. The Krell had seemed invincible, and humans had destroyed them with ease. Any species,